It's the early 1980s, 7th grade. Yours truly had not yet become the paragon of self-confidence and font of wisdom that you see before you today. Fact is, I was a skinny little math nerd whose family had just moved from the cushy suburbs into the rough-and-tumble inner city, where being called an Einstein was an insult, and being the new kid at school was an unpardonable crime. I was bullied. Not a ton, but enough to make me hate the city, hate that my parents had decided to move there, and worst of all, hate school. Most often, the bullying consisted of petty mockery. "Where'd you get your buddies? Kmart? Yo, INRIS wears buddies! Ha ha!" I didn't even know what buddies were. They were discount sneakers. And yes, my clothes came from the bargain bins at the local cheap-ass department stores. Our corner of the city was one of those blue-collar working-class neighborhoods. Everybody's clothes came from the discount bins at the local cheap-ass department stores. But I guess not all the kids wore the cheapest sneakers. I'm sure I didn't help matters by being a pasty white suburban transplant who spoke like an uptight, effete intellectual and took himself way too seriously on a playground occupied by ethnically diverse and economically oppressed kids who had to learn to be scrappy and sarcastic because it was simply the way of life there. My family was no better off financially than any of our neighbors, but because we had lived outside the city limits for all of my life up until that time, I took rules, and myself, way too seriously. But being bullied wasn't always just about being taunted, which was bad enough. There would be fights. Actually, more often, there would be kids who said they wanted to fight me and they would chase me, and I would run, because, well, that's what you do when you don't know any better. So there I was, miserable and afraid of my school, and parents can tell their kids, if you just stand up for yourself, they'd back down, but when your instinct is to avoid conflict, you run. And then my parents came up with a brilliant plan, a cunning plan even. Let's sign up little INRIS for karate lessons. The American-style karate school of self-defense, or something like that, was about 1.5, maybe 2-mile walk down the main road from my block. Something like 1 private lesson per week and 2 group lessons, where you learned set routines and practiced how to correctly throw specific kinds of punches and kicks. I practiced the moves and I hit the bags, but when it came to sparring, I was still just a big wet noodle. I'd flinch the moment my sparring partner would move toward me. I still remember my breakthrough moment there. We were sparring, and I was wimping out on everything as usual, and finally one of the instructors took me to a corner, and he held up his pads on his hands, and said he wasn't going to get out of my way and let me out of the corner until I hit the pads like I meant it. I had to fight my way out, and I didn't want to, But he didn't back down. He wouldn't back down. Class was over, and he still wouldn't let me leave until I punched or kicked my way out. Why I was so afraid to just throw a punch like I meant it, I have no idea. But it just got to the point where I wanted to leave more than I didn't want to be aggressive. So I lashed out at those pads, punching with all the technique and strength my noodly little 12-year-old arms could manage, and I fought my way to freedom. And that was it. Class was over for me. The other kids were already done, of course, and I got back into my street clothes and I went home. But I wasn't the same after that. With the long walks each way 3 times a week, the push-ups and sit-ups and practicing the punches and kicks and the routines, my body changed. The way I moved changed. My posture, my swagger, my confidence. And it only took one time. One kid who said he was going to fight me after school, and then, after school, instead of trying to avoid him, I went my normal route home. He stopped me, and I didn't run. And he didn't know what to do, so he ran at me. But I knew how to respond. I had him in a headlock, just like that. And the kids had formed a circle around us, and first they had been chanting for him, but now they were chanting for me. "Punch him! You got him!" But I didn't punch him. I just held on to him. I'm standing there, and he's standing there. Only he's bent down, and I have his head trapped in the crook of my arm, against the side of my body, and I wouldn't let him go. But I also didn't hit him. He'd try to hit me, but he couldn't get any kind of angle. He tried to get out, but I wouldn't let him go. And I waited until he gave up, and after he did, I waited a moment again, and then I let him go. I was concerned he might try another punch, but I wasn't afraid. And he looked at me, and whatever he saw, he decided that there was no point in making another attempt, so he left. "Forget you, man!" And I left, and the crowd dispersed, and that was that. No more getting bullied for me at public school number 81. Now, I can't say that all my troubles were solved from that day forward, but my path definitely started moving in a different direction. A better direction. So yeah, just another story about a Gen Xer growing up in the rough and tumble 1980s, but also a story about parents who tried to figure out a way for their wimpy, nerdy son to stop getting bullied, and who succeeded. And by the way, yes, of course, we as a society need to do a better job of teaching punk-ass kids not to bully. But while we're working on that, we can also teach the kids who are being picked on ways maybe to defend themselves a little better. And if you think you, or your kids, or someone else you care about, could benefit from just a little boost to the self-confidence, I'm going to recommend self-defense or martial arts classes from a reputable school or training program. Thanks for stopping by the INRIS Files. We'll see you next time.